Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Theology Central podcast. Welcome back to VBC, Victory Baptist Church. Welcome back to Ovalo, Texas. Welcome back to Inside VBC. Welcome back to Inside the Church. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for listening. Yes, this is the Theology Central podcast. Yes, it is Thursday, April the 8th, 2021. It is 8:42 a.m. Central Time. And if you're listening to us live this morning, you know what I always say. If you're listening to us live, thank you so very much for tuning into the live broadcast. Feel free to participate in the live broadcast by hitting the little chat icon right there on the Spreaker app. Say good morning, whatever time it is, say hello, and then feel free to throw in your thoughts. And because sometimes your thoughts are better than anything I'm saying. So feel free to participate in the live chat. Sometimes I can immediately respond. Sometimes I'm trying to make a point, and then I'll have to circle back around to the comments that are showing up in the chat window. So, and if you have a specific question related to what we're talking about, then that's always very helpful, because if you have that question, there's probably other people listening who have the exact same question. So feel free to chime in, to give me your 2 cents anytime you so desire, all right? It's easy access to me that way, all right? So feel free to participate. Now, we are going to return once again to the Sermon on the Mount this morning. And yesterday when we covered the Sermon on the Mount, what we're doing, just so that everyone knows, we get everyone on the same page here. We've been looking at the Sermon on the Mount now for a very long time, right? This is kind of turning into a lengthy series looking at the Sermon on the Mount. One of the reasons we're looking at the Sermon on the Mount is obviously it's such a very well-known section of Scripture. People reference verses within the Sermon on the Mount, which goes from Matthew 5 to Matthew 7, over and over and over and over. A lot of times they reference the verses basically out of context from the total sermon. They almost forget that those verses are a part of a larger sermon. And I think in many cases apply the Scriptures or interpret those individual Scriptures in a way that actually goes against the total sermon. So that's why we're looking at the Sermon on the Mount. Also, there's at least 9 to 12 different ways of interpreting the Sermon on the Mount. So I wanted to make sure you were, familiar with all of those different ways of approaching it. It's just a well-known part of Scripture that I don't think people have spent enough time actually thinking and meditating on and looking at all the possible interpretive issues that arises within the Sermon on the Mount. So I'm trying to look at all of them. I'm asking lots of questions, dealing with lots of difficult issues, and I'm hoping that it's causing you to think and maybe it's challenging the way you've looked at the Sermon on the Mount for all of these years. And if I can accomplish that, then I've accomplished something, all right? But we really kind of turned the corner and are studying the Sermon on the Mount based off what happened in Atlanta, where a man took a gun, walked into some massage parlors, some spas, and ended up killing 8 people. 6 of them were women of Asian descent. And then it sparked a major debate about Christians and our teaching on sexuality, because the man who did the shooting claimed that these places were sources of great temptation. He was religious, claiming to be a Christian, and that he had to eliminate the temptation because he couldn't resist it, and it was causing him too many problems. Now, the man has a lot of issues going on, obviously. But it did spark this debate. It did spark this controversy over this. And the reason I think it sparked the debate is it's been building for the last, 5-6 years, where a lot of people who grew up during kind of the purity culture period of Christianity, where people were signing these pledges not to have sex until marriage and wearing purity rings and kissing, dating goodbye, and these books and all of these movements and all of these conferences. A lot of people who came out of all of that said that it damaged their understanding of sexuality. It hurt them. It hurt their future marriage. It was horrible. It was, it shows you how messed up Christianity is when it comes to the subject of sexuality. And there's been lots of criticism. So I thought, okay, let's use the section on the Sermon on the Mount that talks about lust. Let's look at that and see what the Bible actually says in regards to this subject, how we should understand it. Let's listen to other people teach on it. Let's analyze their teaching, and let's see if we can come up with something that's useful and helpful in regards to the subject of lust. And the reason we're looking at this is because I know you know, because this verse is quoted all the time. And Matthew chapter 5, verse 27, we read these words. You have heard that it was said by them of old time, thou shalt not commit adultery. All right. Now we understand that that's a reference to the Old Testament law. You're not to commit adultery. That is obviously a reference to physical adultery. You're not to commit adultery. You're not to have sexual relations with someone other than your spouse. You're not to have sexual relations with someone else who is married. You're not to commit adultery, right? That's very simple to understand, very easy. Here's the physical act. Avoid the physical act. Well, you could sit there and go, well, look at me. You could pat yourself on the back and say, I've never committed physical adultery. Therefore, I'm godly. I keep God's law, and everything is wonderful. Jesus comes along and says, wait a minute. The law, that you need to understand that the law goes beyond just the physical act. You can commit adultery without ever committing the physical act. Now, once Jesus brings this idea to light, it creates never-ending amounts of problems, right? You can't even understand all the problems this generates, because he goes, now you can't simply say, well, I've never committed the physical act, so I'm good. No. And look, I'll read it. But I say unto you that whosoever looketh on a woman and to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. If you look at a woman with lust, you have already committed adultery. So that means you can be an adulterer and you've never touched another woman. You've never been alone with another woman. You've never gotten yourself in any kind of compromising situations. It doesn't matter. If you looked at a woman with lust, you have committed adultery. You've committed adultery. Therefore, you're an adulterer, meaning that churches are filled with adulterers who've never touched another woman, but they're still an adulterer according to Jesus' explanation of the law. He goes to the deeper understanding that this is not just the physical act. This is an internal issue. And depending on how you understand it, some people define this that if you just have the desire in your heart to have sex with someone other than your wife, you have committed adultery. If the desire shows up, it's over. You've done it. You're an adulterer. Well, you can understand the problems this can create. Depending on the studies you read, it appears that men think about sex about 19 times a day. I think that's the latest studies. I know there was an urban legend that it was every 7 seconds, but that doesn't appear to be true. I think it's about 19 times a day, according to the latest studies I've read. So 19 times a day, a man thinks about sex. I cannot speak, I'm not speaking in regards to women. I'm just focusing on the men here. But 19 times a day, how many times does that desire basically amount to you being an adulterer or a fornicator? You're a fornicator. You're not married, but you're desiring sex with someone you're not married to. So either you're a fornicator or you're an adulterer. Well, what's the solution? What is the solution to this problem? Because that means everyone in the church basically, and again, speaking of men, are probably adulterers on a pretty regular and consistent basis. There's a high probability that most men within a church commit adultery, according to the way Jesus defines it, probably multiple times a week. So what do you do? What do you do? Now, I think first thing you have to do is we have to figure out how to interpret the Sermon on the Mount. And I think the main way to interpret the Sermon on the Mount, is I've stated this over and over and over, is that Jesus is giving an understanding of the law that condemns everyone. In other words, his explanation of the law, him showing you the deeper understanding of the law, that you have to go beyond just the external obedience. Jesus is demanding an internal heart obedience, that anyone looking at this will at the end basically rip their clothes, put on sackcloth, throw some ashes upon their head and say, I'm a sinner and I deserve hell. That this is giving a level of righteousness that nobody can keep. No one. Everyone would be condemned by this over and over and over and over, and that includes Christians. That's the only way to interpret this. But most Christians don't interpret it that way. They believe that this either serves as a test, like, hey, how do you know you're truly a Christian? You keep the Sermon on the Mount. Or they argue that and sometimes it goes along with the test idea, that because you are a Christian, you now have the power to obey the Sermon on the Mount. The only problem is while we run around and preach it that way, everyone in the church that is hearing those sermons, if they're honest with themselves, they're not passing the test. And clearly they seem to lack the power to actually keep the Sermon on the Mount, to keep the law of the Sermon on the Mount, to keep the commandments of the Sermon on the Mount. And so they end up in a point of total discouragement and despair. But nobody wants to have that conversation. Everybody wants to avoid it. But we are trying to figure out exactly how do we understand this section. So we've been reviewing a sermon from a church in Council Bluffs, Iowa. Now, last night, I was talking to my wife about the time I spent yesterday reviewing this sermon, and I was expressing great frustration with it. I was expressing my aggravation, my frustration, my irritation, just how that it really is not providing any help. Basically, if you summarize kind of what we heard yesterday, it basically goes like this. Look, if you're a man and you keep having lust in your heart and committing adultery in your heart, you're not a Christian. And you're going to go to hell. That's pretty much where they placed it. Like you that's what you were before you became a Christian, but now you become a Christian, it stops because you have the power. And I'm like, that's not helpful. But in the midst of the sermon, he sought to give some practical tips. Now, I want you to listen to me carefully here, right? You've got to put your thinking caps on to tell me, because I was hoping someone else when I started talking to my wife about it, I was hoping that when I woke up this morning, someone would have sent me an email going, did you catch that? And I would have been like, oh, good. What did you catch? And then hopefully they would have discovered the same thing I discovered in regards to this sermon that we are reviewing, because there's something very troubling about it. Let me explain. All right. So in Matthew 5, if I look at a woman with lust, I'm an adulterer. So what does Jesus say to do? What does Jesus come along and tell us to do? Well, he says in verse 29, if thy right eye offend thee, pluck it out and cast it from thee, for it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not thy whole body should be cast into hell. All right. People have read this, and all kinds of ideas have emerged in church history. The actual idea of removing body parts in order to not lust, that to that extreme people have gone. Others say it's just hyperbole, and what Jesus is saying is remove the I guess the source of lust. But I want you to consider something. Most people argue that that even if you removed both of your eyes, you would still lust. That's how most pastors acknowledge it. That, hey, even if you were to pluck out both eyes, you would still lust. That this is an issue of the heart. Now keep that in mind. That's what most Christians would say. That no, Jesus is not saying rip out your actual eye, because if you ripped out both eyes, you would still lust. At the same time that pastors say that, they will turn around sometimes within the same sermon and say, what you have to do to stop lusting is just stop looking. But wait a minute. If I remove both eyes and I could still lust, then simply not looking wouldn't fix the problem either, right? So if you say, hey, removing both eyes wouldn't fix the problem, it's a heart problem, and then you turn around and say, just don't look and that'll help you. Well, no, if removing the eyes won't help me, not looking won't help me. So which is it? If not looking is the solution, then plucking out both eyes would be a viable solution to the problem. Go to the doctor. Hey, I need you to remove both of my eyes. Why? Because I continue to have a problem with lust, and my pastor told me not to look. Well, I keep looking, so the only way to stop looking is to remove both of my eyes. So can you remove my eyes or blind me so that I can stop, committing, I can stop being an adulterer? Now, you say that sounds crazy. Well, which is it, though? If you tell me not to look, well, then removing the eye may be the only solution. But if you tell me removing the eye won't fix the problem because it's a heart problem, well, then you're contradicting yourself. In this sermon, that we're reviewing, I think this contradiction shows up, that it manifests itself in his trying to figure this out. In fact, the more I listen to this sermon, the more frustrated I get because he's not offering any. Look, I don't know if you can really offer a tangible solution to this problem. I really don't know if you can, but you got to at least try. You got to at least acknowledge the difficulty. This is a very hard text of Scripture, and pastors just move past it in like 1 week and move on to the next thing. And I don't know how I've said it before. I don't understand how pastors think. They seem to like, oh, I got to get through this series so that we can move on to another series. My thing is, no, I'm dealing with the text of Scripture. I'll stay there as long as necessary because my job is to help people understand it. This is a major section of Scripture dealing with a sin that is so prevalent that we probably can't even scratch the surface and how prevalent it is in every church and in every Christian home. So we have to deal with it. So I've backed this up, and we're going to see if we can catch this weird, like, hey, removing the eyes won't fix it, but hey, don't look. I want to see if you see this weird, like, wait a minute. So which one is it? I want to see if is it just me or is it actually there? Now, I don't know if I've got the sermon queued up to the right place to find it. So I'm hoping that this doesn't turn into be a big letdown and I cannot find this, what I think is a contradiction. But I've got it queued up to a certain point. If we need to move it back, we'll move it back and we'll try to find this. But let's work together. And you can tell me if you see, okay, you know what, that is a contradiction. Or if you say, no, I don't think it's a contradiction. I think he's trying to say this. By all means, give me your viewpoint, your perspective, and let's see what we can do. So thinking caps on. Here we go. Back to Council Bluffs, Iowa. Back to this church where they're doing a series on the Sermon on the Mount that we're utilizing to spark our own discussions and our own conversations. Let's see, as this pastor tries to explain basically how you fix this problem, let's see if he offers two contradictory ideas. Hey, if you remove your eyes, that won't fix it because it's a heart problem. At the same time, just don't look. That, to me, appears to be a contradiction. Tell me what you think. Here we go.
Verse 29, boy, how can you follow that up? Well, Jesus does with some of the strongest words we have in the New Testament. If your right eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and cast it from you. For it is more profitable for you that one of your members perish than for your whole body to be cast into hell. Wow. Immediately on the heels of saying whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery in the heart, Jesus says immediately then, he makes this exceedingly strong statement about the eye. He says, if your right eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and cast it from you. Now, the elders will be up here after the service to assist you. I know it's going to be a long line. We've got patches. Anyway, this is a radical statement, though, is it not? Requiring radical action. You can't be passive when it comes to the lust of the eyes. It requires drastic action. This is the only way one can have victory over it. Essentially, all commentators believe that Jesus was here speaking in hyperbole or exaggerated terms to make a point. And sometimes the Bible does use this kind of language to make a point. For example, in Proverbs 23:2, it says, and put a knife to your throat if you are a man given to appetite. Now, it's not saying that you should commit suicide, but rather figuratively saying that the person should take drastic measures to ensure that he cuts back on how much he eats. It's being stated in a figurative way. If lust is truly a heart problem, which Jesus has just indicated it is, then the answer is not found in a physical solution, such as gouging out the eye.
All right, there we have it. Now write that down. If lust is basically a heart issue, then there's no physical solution like gouging out your eyes. There's no physical solution. This is a heart problem. Now, he's already established that. Now, see if he now switches it later and says, well, just don't look. Well, just don't look would be a physical solution. And if just not looking fixes the problem, then gouging out the eyes would be a reasonable solution. So I'm sometimes baffled by how churches try to handle these very difficult passages of Scripture. When they try to come up with a solution, they end up almost contradicting themselves. But he's already established. So rule number one, according to him, you may want to write this down. Rule number one, according to him, is, hey, it's a heart problem. There's no physical solution. Gouging out your eyes won't fix the problem. All right, now, if gouging out the eyes won't fix the problem, then I think we can logically infer then simply not looking won't fix the problem, because gouging out the eyes would prevent me from looking, right? Now, see where he goes here, all right? Let's continue.
And even if you do gouge out the right eye, you still have the other left eye to contend with. As someone has said, then you're just left being a left-eyed luster. And if you gouge out both eyes, you still have the thoughts of the heart.
All right, so even if you gouge out both eyes, you still have the thoughts of the heart. So he's making an argument. He's establishing a perspective, an interpretation that cutting everything off won't fix the problem. Cutting out, removing eyes so you cannot look will not fix the problem. Keep that in mind. Now let's see if he contradicts that here in a few minutes.
And right there's the fundamental problem that Jesus has zeroed in on. Jesus is using figurative language to emphasize that a problem with lust must be dealt with in a very decisive and drastic manner. In terms of application for believers, what Jesus is saying here is very close to the emphasis Paul made in Colossians chapter 3 and verse 5, where he says, therefore put to death your members. Now he wasn't talking about, church members. He's talking about members of your body, which are on the earth: fornication, uncleanness, passion, evil desire, covetousness, which is idolatry. Now it's interesting. Notice he says, put to death your members. Put to death is very strong in the Greek. It means to kill decisively or resolutely. It means to slay utterly. There is to be no negotiation or dilly-dallying here. This means to kill outright. Go for the jugular. Severe measures are required. Paul speaks of your members which are on the earth in a metaphorical way. Really, he is speaking of the sins committed in conjunction with various members of the physical body. That's what he's talking about. We are to stop the body dead in its tracks when it comes to these particular sins. In effect, we are to kill sin at the root in terms of our practice. These sins are not to have any place in our members. And this is comparable to what Christ said here in Matthew 5, when he said to pluck out and cut off. The essential idea is to radically deal with sin that wants to work its way out into your life through your body. By our will, with God's help, and always with God's help, Hebrews 4:16, we must respond resolutely to the lusts of the flesh that would seek to use our physical body for illicit purposes. I heard of a dog trainer who teaches dogs to be absolutely obedient to their master. And his method goes like this. When he begins training a dog, he will command it not to eat a piece of meat and then throw it down in front of the dog. And of course, the dog immediately gobbles it up. He will then beat the dog. Not cruelly or abusively, but sufficient for training. As he repeats the process, the dog learns to associate pain with eating the meat, contrary to the orders of the master. And so the dog will come to realize it cannot look at the meat or it will capitulate with resulting pain. The dog learns the secret of obedience is not to look at the meat.
Okay, so wait a minute. If I pluck out my eyes, that won't fix the problem because it's a heart issue. Then he turns around and gives this illustration of a dog who learns the secret is not to look. Well, if I don't have any eyes, I can't look. And you said that's not the solution. Now you seem to be putting forth the idea that not to look is the solution. And this is literally in the same sermon, minutes apart. Can someone explain exactly what the solution is? Pluck out your eyes. Nope, that won't work. That won't work. That won't work. That won't work, because you're still going to have the thoughts of the heart. Hey, I heard this story about a dog trainer, and he would throw meat down. The dog would would immediately grab the meat. He would beat the dog. So the dog associated basically meat with pain. And so finally he realizes, I can't look at the meat or I'm going to devour it and eat it. Okay, well, that's the solution. Don't look. Well, you just said removing the eyes won't work. Could someone explain this to me? This is what we get within Christianity when dealing with such a sensitive and powerful topic like lust. Dealing with something so intimate and sensitive like sexuality, and we're getting this weird, like, just throw out any ideas, even if they contradict one another, in the same sermon. Let's move on to the next week and we'll be in a different section. I hope everyone's good to go. It's like, what did you really accomplish in that sermon? Who did you help? I can't even articulate what his solution is. Let's let him finish this, because I don't want to cut off the context. Maybe he clarified it in a way that makes sense, but from the surface there, I don't get it. But let's see if he clarifies it.
If the dog looks at the meat, it's over. The dog learns not to even look at the meat until the master says it's okay. What a great illustration. We cannot look or we will fail. When it comes to sexual temptation, the Bible commands us to flee. Don't look. If one flirts with the enticement of looking, they will most likely suffer the painful consequences of failure.
See, he keeps saying don't look, but he previously said removing the eyes won't fix it. Well, if I remove the eyes, I can't look. Wouldn't removing the eyes then literally be the best solution? Wouldn't it literally be the best solution? If you're telling me not to look, then why would you throw out the idea that removing the eyes would work? I don't understand. Can someone explain this to me? I'm not trying to be mean. I'm not trying to be rude. I'm not giving the name of the church or the name of the pastor. So clearly I'm not trying to make this personal. I'm truly just don't get it. Which is it? Remove the eyes. That won't work. Got the thoughts of the heart. Don't look. Don't look. Don't look. That's the solution. If you can figure that out, by all means, let me know, because you probably deserve an award for being able to figure this out, because I can't. I cannot figure this out. Let's just play a couple of more minutes of this.
Joseph ran from sexual temptation and thus kept his purity.
Joseph ran and kept his purity. Listen, kept his purity. Are you ready for this? From the physical act. You don't know, nor do I know, what was in his mind as he was running. I will argue the fact that he fled told me that the desire was there and he knew he had to get away as soon as possible. Well, if he ran away, but the desire was there, then according to Jesus, he already committed adultery in his heart. So even running away doesn't fix it, because if I'm running away going, oh, no, okay, I got to get away from this. But my brain is desiring it, then I've committed adultery in the heart. So by all means, run. By all means, avoid the physical act. By all means. But you cannot say that Joseph didn't have the thought. In fact, the fact that he fled, he had to realize, I'm in trouble here. I got to get out of this situation. Why did he have to get out of the situation? There had to be a desire. Look, if you didn't have the desire, there'd be no need to run, right? Hey, come on. Just come on, go away. Leave me alone. I have no desire for that. What are you doing? It's like someone walking up to me, offering me a big glass of of tea. Okay, I'd be like, I got to get away from that because I'd be like, I don't like tea. That's what I think about tea. I don't drink. I know I'm in Texas and I don't drink tea. Get it away from me, right? Because I have no desire. It's not a temptation. It's not a temptation. It's like an alcoholic. Many alcoholics cannot go into a bar because the temptation is so great because the desire is there. If there was no desire, they could walk into the bar and just sit there and hang out with their friends and not have any problem at all. But the desire is there. The reason Joseph fled is because the desire had to be present. That's the only way to understand that text. So you're like, he kept his purity. He kept his purity from the physical act. You have no idea if he kept his purity in the mental act. If he didn't in the mental act, then guess what? He was an adulterer. That's the whole point of what Jesus is saying. He's giving a command and an ethic and a morality that goes beyond our ability to ever obey it fully. Therefore, we are condemned by it. We are condemned by it. And any idea, and the idea this sermon basically carries the idea that you can overcome it, that you can do it. And it's just not. That creates a problem of utter despair in some people's lives. This could lead people to not only discouragement, I think it could lead people to becoming suicidal if they take it seriously. But clearly the men who hear these kinds of sermons don't take it seriously. Or they convince themselves that they never look at a woman with lust. I'll give you an example. When I first moved to Nebraska for the United States military, the first pastor I met was basically a Pentecostal holiest. What's the movement? Holiest movement. Yeah, is that the name of the movement? Okay. And basically this Pentecostal movement that believed in basically sinless perfection, that you could stop sinning. And I was already starting to have some theological disagreements. There was another airman in the dorms who we started talking about Christianity, and this pastor was trying to pull him towards this Pentecostal holiest idea, this sinless perfection idea, and I was trying to say no. This charisma. This is not right. We got to find a different church. We got to find a different path. This is not acceptable. And I'll never forget, he walked into I think it was like the day room of the dorm, and there was something on television. I don't know if it was a video from MTV. I don't know what it was, but it was clearly a woman basically it was obviously something that would create a desire in about 3.2 seconds. And I remember that pastor standing there looking at it. And I wanted to say, what are you looking at? What are you thinking? Because he claims he doesn't commit sin. He's sinless because he's sinless. He's reached the level of sinless perfection. And I just wondered what's going through his mind right there. And I know what had to be going through his mind because any guy seeing the video, seeing what was on the screen would have had the exact same thoughts, and it would not have been right. They would have been sinful. But he convinced himself that I guess he could look and not sin. Well, no, he may look and not commit a physical act, but that doesn't mean that he wasn't without sin. Now, I can't read his mind. Maybe he was able to read it without, but I'm just saying most likely that's not the case. And I just think that sometimes men, we either deceive ourselves into thinking that we're more godly than we are, and we won't be honest about the lust that's in our heart. But this is just crazy. Hey, plucking out the eyes won't work. Hey, and then his grand solution, don't look, run, flee. And then points to Joseph because Joseph fled he kept his purity. He kept his physical purity. You have no idea if he didn't violate this idea of desiring it in his heart. You don't know that. So it's like he's not even being consistent with the words of Jesus here. It's so frustrating. It's so frustrating. Let's just see if he says anything else to clarify this.
Samson did not run and therefore stumbled.
Samson did not run and he stumbled in the physical act. What What am I missing here? Is he preaching on Matthew 5 or is he preaching on a different text? He's giving examples of someone who did not avoid, someone who avoided the physical act and someone who did not avoid the physical act. That has nothing to do with what Jesus is saying here. Jesus is not talking about the physical act. He's saying that even if I avoid the physical act, I never touch a woman. If I desire it and think of it in my heart, I'm guilty of it. So I don't know why he's going to the examples of physical act. That has nothing to do with what Jesus is referring to here.
The allurement of sexual sin is so powerful that we must flee from it if we are to be victorious. There can be no negotiation. The flesh craves to look. But just like the well-trained dog, we must realize we cannot even look, or we will fail. The warning of Jesus is severe to make this point. This certainly applies in terms of a strong application to the life.
So just don't look. Don't look. Don't look. Okay, well then I don't know how, from just following a logical progression of thought, if not looking is the solution, if I don't look, then I won't lust, then it would make sense plucking out my eyes would be a viable and spiritually profitable solution. If I could rip out my eyes, if I could be made blind, then I would never have the problem again, because he just said the solution is not to look. But he already argued against the plucking out the eyes. Now, did he argue against the plucking out of the eyes? He argued because it wouldn't work. Well, if it wouldn't work, why did Jesus suggest it? Well, Jesus didn't really mean it that way. Okay, well, then how did he mean it? Because if you say, well, he just meant that we have to take extreme measures against it, and then his extreme measure against it was simply don't look, but he already made the argument that removing the eyes wouldn't fix the problem, so not looking won't fix the problem. Oh, it can greatly help not to be looking at things that can create lust. Obviously, it can help, but if it won't completely alleviate, if even not looking will not completely alleviate the problem, then that we have a problem here that no one is going to escape being involved in. And again, I cannot speak for women. I can only speak for men. I've never been inside of a woman's body. I've never been inside of a woman's brain. I don't know what goes on there. I cannot speak for that. Only women can speak to that. But for men, I've been there. I know that. I've been around men and work environments in the military for a very long time, and for crying out loud, it's every time a woman would walk by, a comment would have to be made. And I worked in the medical world. A patient would come in and be like, "Oh my goodness, did you see her?" And you've been around men. I cannot. When men are open and honest with their thoughts, there's a lot of lust. And if they're not open and honest with their thoughts, there's still a lot of lust. But I just wanted you to hear that really weird contradiction there. Plucking out the eyes won't work. Solution, don't look. And that is Christianity's great solution to the lust problem. And I wanted to jump ahead to when he starts talking about adultery, but we'll have to get to that next time. I just wanted you to hear that today because it bothered me. I was hoping that other people would have caught that yesterday. I didn't point it out. I was really hoping other people would catch it. But the more I talked about it with my wife, the more frustrated I got because it was just like, that's so contradictory. That's so contradictory. And men don't need a contradictory message when dealing with such a profound struggle in the lives of many Christian men. A profound struggle. Look at, again, you can read all the statistics about men and pornography, Christian men and pornography, pastors and pornography. It is staggering numbers, right? And you can, and people try to argue, well, I don't believe those numbers. I don't believe those numbers. Why would pastors lie? Why would pastors come out and lie about their struggle with pornography? Why? You would think that the numbers would not be as honest as you would think they would be. In other words, you think pastors would be more prone to lie than to be honest. Christian men would be more prone to lie than to be honest. And even taking that into account, the numbers are still staggering when it comes to how prevalent these things are within Christianity. And we've got to have better conversations than this. This is tragic. And this is what leads to people to utter despair and frustration. And because they don't know what to do. They don't know what to do. What he just offered was a contradictory solution that makes absolutely no sense. And I had to point that out. All right. You can probably point out sermons you've heard on this very subject where there's contradiction. We've got to come up with better solutions. All right. I'll stop right there. You can email me your thoughts. newsif@yahoo.com. newsif@yahoo.com. That's newsif@yahoo.com. 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 I'm having a few problems this morning. I have taken my medication, so I don't have a seizure. So I am having a few issues this morning, so I apologize for the rough start. But hopefully, in spite of the rough introduction, hopefully I made my point very clear right there. I am very disappointed in all of you. I am very disappointed in all of you because I really thought this morning I was going to wake up and there was going to be emails going, did you notice that in that sermon he contradicted himself? Hey, did you notice in that sermon he contradicted himself? But none of you caught it. So I'm disappointed in all of you. I'm so disappointed. I'm so disappointed. I'm so disappointed. You all should be, I don't know, you should grounded. I don't know. You should be forced to do something. But yeah, I'm very disappointed. I really was hoping I was going to get a lot of emails pointing that contradiction out. But now I pointed it out for you. You can tell me what you think about that contradiction. And if you don't think he was contradicting himself, then please let me know. Yeah, explain it to me. Explain it to me. All right? So, all right, we'll stop right there. I'll be back on the air shortly. God bless.